I always start with, okay, welcome, Elena Kazamia. And I'm so excited to bring Elena to this forum because she's just the most joyful person. And if you go onto YouTube and you watch this video instead, and we're creating some short videos, Elena has created like this background of this beautiful like grass, and she's like kind of in it as like a bit of tiny nature. So we'll get to that conversation along the way. But I discovered Elena because I read this, and if you read my newsletter, you'll see I read this really interesting article about this man in Mexico who figured out how to create the blue dye that was in a yarn or Mayan blue. And it just took me down this path. And I'm a scientist from past life, and connection between science and art and culture is my thing. So as well as this beautiful person that I'm interacting with now. So Elena, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are and give us a little bit about the breadth. Like, I'm blown away by just the breadth of the work that you do and what you bring to us. So yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you for such a lovely introduction, Jessica. It's really nice to be on the podcast. So I am a scientist and writer. In a previous life, I was just doing a lot of science, and my specialty is algae. And I often used to get the question, like, why do you study algae? It's just such actually now people are more familiar with what they can do and where they are, but it used to be sort of very niche. And the honest answer was that I actually found thinking about algae something to be quite romantic. This idea of single living cells out in the ocean producing oxygen for us to breathe. And obviously they're not thinking about us at all. They're not thinking at all in the same way that we think. But anyway, it was something I found my own research to be very inspiring, but also the work of other scientists to be very inspiring. And I love to tell stories. I love to tell stories from my own research, but also those of others. So right now, I work as a writer mainly for Nautilus magazine, which is a science and culture magazine. And one of the nicest things about it is that I don't really have a very specific beat. So I don't, I cover a variety of topics, whatever interests me and the editors. And that's often at the intersection of science and art. Like you mentioned, Jessica, the Mayan blue story was a great example of, I think he's a teacher and a potter in Yucatan and Mexico. And he rediscovered the blue pigment that the Mayans, his ancestors, he is also Maya, he considers himself Maya, that his ancestors were also using in their pottery and sculptures. And so that was really great to sort of talk a little bit about both the chemistry behind the process, but also just about the art that he was doing. But there's been so many stories, that I come across now in my reporting. And I think the one that we might talk about today a little bit more is the insect story that I wrote last year.
But I have to interrupt you for a sec, because first of all, there's so much humility going on here. Okay, so first of all, we've got a PhD from Cambridge and like this breadth of work that, and just as a total aside, that you studied, which I didn't really put the two of them together, algae, and which you pronounce algae, and I was pronouncing it correctly. Yeah, and I was just telling Elena about the parrotfish eating that being their source of, and she like wrote it down, and like we have to have a conversation about parrotfish at some point along the way, and like their contribution to the world by their eating algae and then creating the sand of most of our white sand.
I know. That blew my mind. I really honestly didn't know anything about it. And it's, you really can spend forever in a field and still not know like most of the things about what other people know in your field.
Science is a big
field. Like everybody else's work too, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in looking at sort of just the breadth of your work and reading like many, many titles of articles and of research, they span between following really interesting humans who've done really interesting work in science and nature and that kind of stuff, to outer space, to micro to one-celled organisms, to art and culture. It's just so beautiful to imagine your brain, like the swimming in so much joyful curiosity and that's going in so many different directions, but that you narrow it down and you are able to focus on something and really bring the story to life. There aren't that many good science writers. And I have to just offer it to listeners, go to Nautilus Magazine, go to, we'll put the show notes, how to reach, connect with a lot of these articles, but they're so readable. You just feel like you're in the story, and including in the Pyrenees, counting bugs and birds and all that stuff. So we'll talk about that. So
thank you so much. That's such a great compliment. And that's really what drives me. It's a passion to sort of connect exactly to that, to the human spirit and how we try to understand the world around us, but also the introspection that brings in terms of sort of the people who are involved and what that means about our nature, our human nature.
Yeah. And just sort of to get to the sort of a sort of gritty level of that, the story that we both know we want to share is just one of the many articles that was about a scientist, a man, one of quite a rare bunch, who does something that seems like there should be more people doing it, who found himself in the mountains in Europe, in the Pyrenees, right? Counting bugs, because we need to know data. We need data, and it's got to be done. AI will get there somehow, but AI, has to be trained by humans. And so tell us the beginning of this, or tell us the story that you wrote about, and then we can see where that goes.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. I think so. The main protagonist that I guess is a scientist called William Hawkes. He's based at the University of Exeter in the UK. And he is one of, apparently, according to him, about 50 to 100 scientists most who study insect migrations. So when I came to the story, I had found it, I think, just looking on Eureka Alerts, which is a website where new discoveries are sort of announced by various universities. And so I saw this and I thought, insects migrate, how have maybe I'd heard of the monarch butterfly. I'm based in Southern California. We have monarch butterflies that come here in the winter from Canada.
Wow.
I knew that the monarch butterfly does this, but I really didn't know that a lot of insects do this. And I certainly didn't know that it is the biggest animal migration on Earth.
How mind-blowing is it that most people really, almost nobody probably, if you count fractionally how many people in the world know about insect migrations. We think we know, birds fly south for the winter, but and we kind of have heard about monarch butterflies if they're in our world in the US, but this is so important. And you brought it to life. So keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So of course I really wanted to reach out to him, and I usually have, quite short-ish conversations, but with this guy, we ended up talking for an hour and a half. I just couldn't let him go because there was just more and more that I learned about insects. And his favorite insect, the one that the research is mostly based, is on the marmalade hoverfly. Which lives in exactly, what a great name, right? Of the marmalade hoverfly. We don't have that here in North America, but we do have hoverflies. The marmalade hoverfly is sort of it camouflages to look a bit like a bee or a wasp, but it is a fly. And so it undertakes this migration that William was studying.
It's so appropriate for him to be British and it to be,
right?
There can't be a coincidence there.
And so they had set up, basically there's a pass. So the insects migrate, they undertake these, the numbers are extraordinary. There's tons and tons of biomass. You could think of it as just weight of animal in the air. And if you think about it that way, it is the biggest migration on Earth. So it's the biggest movement of animals across the planet. it is visible by radar. So we have apparently we've known about this since we've had radars, they can detect them. But what we don't know is what species are involved, because that's not something that a radar can detect. So people like Dr. Hawks, they go out to these places to record the migrations, but they're very difficult to record because insects are very small. They can fly in a really diffuse way. So like as just a tiny human on the ground, like how do you study that? Like that's like a very specific challenge. And he was telling me about some work that he had come across, and it wasn't even real work. I mean, it was work, but it wasn't in a very academic setting. But this couple had been hiking through the Pyrenees, and they walked through this narrow pass, and they said that they witnessed this huge insect migration. They recorded it, and it was in the 50s. And I have a little quote written, like he actually read it out to me during our interview. He said, "It is rare in this time," this is in the 50s, "to be permitted to taste the zest of discovery, which is usually permitted only to the ancients." So this is how the couple felt as they were walking through the Pyrenees and they saw a huge insect migration.
The privilege, just the privilege of connecting so deeply with nature to see it as part of their world and that privilege of being in it.
Yeah. And he said that they weren't sure, because this is in 2018 when they decided to go back to this place, basically the Pyrenees, where this couple had recorded something, and to see if they could still find insects migrating. And they did. And so the reason the pass is important is because the insects are sort of funneled into it as they're trying to cross the mountains. And so if you're a tiny human that we are, you can just sit in one place and you can just record the numbers. And because it's sort of like a concentrated funneling spot for them, you can actually on the ground take measurements, catch the insects so that you can identify them. So that was like the big discovery. Was we knew that because of radar imaging that insects were migrating, but this was a really great spot to actually take some on the ground measurements of what the insects were. And so he spent 4 summers doing this.
Wait, give us a sense. How big is a marmalade hoverfly? Is it?
Well, I think tiny, like 20.
The size of a bee or the size of a... Okay, so it's like... So just to imagine being in this space where they're all consolidated into this narrow chute, and being in there and like, I'm picturing the birds, Alfred Hitchcock and the birds. Like, it's gotta be a pretty freakish commitment, right? To like be in that space and to come back, right?
Exactly. And to come back day after day after day, no matter what the weather, right? Because it's a pretty, you're pretty high up in terms of altitude. So even in the summer, and they were recording at the end of summer and in the start of fall. So it can be pretty cold. He sent me some images. There was like frost on the ground. So they're hiking up to this spot, from the local village at dawn, because they want to be able to be there right at dawn, because that's when some of the insects start flying. They want to see if the weather conditions make a difference. So they're doing it all kinds of days, on rainy days, windy days, sunny days. And they're
capturing as many metrics as they can so that there can be some analysis. Because you can't just, like, if you only just count, you've lost so much opportunity, right? To like figure it out.
Exactly. And I think his job in particular was to set up these traps so that they can sample a proportion of the migration that is then representative of the whole migration, identify who's there. And most of the species are actually flies, which I think was a surprise. There's obviously dragonflies and other insects, moths and butterflies that also migrate, but the majority are flies. So I think that was new. And then most of them are also pollinators. So that was already like a really huge thing that suddenly, and this is where my, it's not just his journey and like this human spirit of like hiking up the mountain to take these measurements that most people would probably just find obscure. It's that it matters, and it matters because it connects, like the scale suddenly begins to add up, and these things matter to us to, in a way that we probably hadn't considered before. So because these insects are pollinators, they're cross-pollinating, and they're bringing pollen from one location to somewhere very far away. And so they're bringing that genetic diversity, and they're helping things grow in very far away locations, from where the pollen would have originally started. So one example he gave me was that, as the climate is shifting and, we have places that are becoming, that are experiencing drought, one of the things that the insects are helping do is they're helping bring pollen from drought-resistant locations to these places, so that suddenly you're bringing in that diversity that can help the whole ecosystem recover. So, and they need to do more work to sort of quantify that and understand that a bit better. But now that they know which species are involved, they can begin to do this. And how absolutely mind-blowing. And then the other one that just I couldn't blew my mind as well. I kept, like I said, I just couldn't get enough of this story. Is that when the insects die, they fertilize the land. So in a way, you have, things that were born in the UK and in Wales and so on, like these flies that hatch there. They die in Spain, and with their bodies, they bring nutrients to Spain that then allow things in Spain to grow. And that's important for the ecosystems in Spain. So everything's interconnected, and sometimes it's on the wing of an insect, and it's sort of just wonderful how the small, the large, and the us kind of as observers and participants kind of all comes together in this story.
It's so, so important. Such a beautiful image, such beautiful imagery to just imagine, like, again, this sort of chute that narrows through these magnificent mountains, and the just the endless cycles of nature, the seasons of nature of moving through, and that it's all a system. We talk about biodiversity, and nothing lives in a vacuum. That seems like a vacuum, like shooting through, right? But when you actually look at what's in the traps alone, you've got this diverse set of flies of all types of animals, and you've got the ones that are getting through, and the ones that are dying and creating or fertilizing, and the ones that are repollinating in another place. Like, it is one big system, and we need to recognize and be much more conscious of systems of nature, so that we don't think we can just put, this whole like mono farming and mono species, like nature doesn't work that way, right? It all interacts between flora, fauna, fungi, phenomena. Like, it's my four F sounding word. And like, this imagery just brings that to life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, your podcast is, a lot of it is about resilience. And one of the things that I asked him about is, are these insects threatened? Like in this era,
of course. Yeah.
About, there's a lot of doom and gloom stories. And actually, he was very positive. He said, no, these are very hardy species. They have learned to do these migrations over 5 generations for the hoverfly. It comes down across the Pyrenees into Spain, and then it takes another 3 or 4 generations for them to return back to the UK. And they are very adaptable. And so he was saying that they navigate by a compass, like a sun compass that they have on their heads.
Wow.
So they know where they are, and they can, they have, they can eat a variety of foods. So he didn't personally feel that they're necessarily threatened by ongoing climate change. And in fact, they could be a solution to some of the ongoing problems because they're so resilient.
We have to learn from them. Like, we have to figure out what it is that makes them fight the pollution and the development and all the things that would prevent them thriving, and that they just keep. So like, thank you for bringing it up. That is what lights me up. Like, how does this happen that they're not suffering and threatened, that they're keeping the cycle going, and they're keeping the movement of large swaths of land all connected?
Exactly. It's just a fly, a fly and hatching somewhere in the UK is going to end up giving birth to its eggs that will hatch into maggots.
And pollinating, right? It's amazing.
Pollinate. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're very familiar with the monarch. Again, some of us are in the States more than others are familiar with the monarch butterflies migration. And if anybody's been following it, they are super threatened. Like the numbers are drastically down. They're not getting, I actually don't remember what it's, whether they're not getting the food they want or they're not getting the space they want or they're not getting something else that they want. You might know the answer to that, but like just to put it in perspective that this is happening and we don't even know it, but it's thriving.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Jessica, is that, I mean, I'm sure that for every positive story, there's probably some examples of extinctions and local threats. And it's true that, especially with insects, there's more species out there that we don't know about than there are ones that we do know about. And so, maybe it's not necessarily the time to be overly optimistic. We are losing insects.
We need some hope, and this is a sign of hope, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The other one that he mentioned, I didn't know the species, but it's called the painted lady butterfly. I had to Google it, but it looks a little bit like a monarch to me. It's very pretty. But he was saying they have some evidence that it's able to fly across the Sahara during its migrations because it travels to sub-Saharan Africa and the Sahel region. So they think that's true. They haven't documented it again, like in the super rigorous empirical scientific way. And they really want to do that. So they're hoping to raise some funding to get that work done. But how amazing would that be, to learn about a butterfly that can fly over the biggest desert on Earth, if it can do that, imagine what we can do.
Exactly, right? If we could learn how, and we keep doing that, like we find these, like I wrote an article recently in my newsletter, just even about the Gila monster and how we got all of these weight loss, the semaglutides, like all of it's biomimicry, like we're like all over it, right? Like for everything we do. If you can trace so much of it back to scientists who are paying attention to nature and learning from nature because nature's got it so figured out. It's been, millions and millions and millions of years. A lot of these species have survived and their resilience is what we can learn from and we can thrive from. Such an important message, right?
Yeah, I agree.
To that end, we started to chat before we started recording about citizen science. So you've got this guy who's one of like 50 to 100 in the whole world counting insects, which is so important, right? To like know who's what's surviving, what's not surviving, what can we learn from them, what value they serve in a system. So we went to citizen science, like, there's apps like Seek and Merlin Bird app. And like, there's a lot of citizen science that just the ones even I'm aware of. I'm guessing that you've got some further knowledge about this in your exploration.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to remember. There's definitely in the US, there's initiatives where on certain. I think isn't it? Oh, wait. There's the Christmas Day bird count. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or is that
I don't know. That's neat. Yeah,
that might be either in the UK or the US. I'm not so sure, but. On that day, you're sort of meant to go outside, take a nature walk, and then record the species that you see. And that's a big citizen science project. I wish I could remember now where exactly that's based.
We'll put it in the show notes. We'll find it.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thanks. There are butterfly walks that people do, and again, that's through an app and you sort of record the statistics of like where you see them on your nature walk. And I haven't heard about other insect tracking apps like that. Like those are the two examples that immediately come to mind. But I think it's a really huge opportunity. Like if it isn't out there, and I might be wrong, it might already be out there. But if it isn't out there, like insects are species that, we share our world with, wherever we are. And so if we can engage more people to just record them as they go about their daily lives, like we can certainly learn a lot more. And so for scientists like William Hawks, having that support network would be really important. Because we tend to ignore insects, but if we just take a closer look, like it's very easy to contribute because there's so many of us, so many eyes on the ground. It can
Well, I mean,
add
it's not
a lot
just
of
that we ignore them.
value.
We actually look, we don't know, right? And the ignorance leads to finding ways to get rid of insects. There's a common story that 30 or 40 years ago, you would take a drive in the United States. It's probably the same thing in Europe. And your windshield would be just covered in bugs, right? Like
Yeah.
it was like a big pain in the neck. And
Yeah.
now you don't. And it's like paying attention to that. It isn't a good thing. But if we don't know it's not a good thing for reasons that, insects are part of the systems that we need, then we're not paying attention to things that are important.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there are some, AI is such a complicated question. I know that's outside of the scope of what we want to talk
No,
about
no,
today.
no. I'm happy to talk about AI. Go for it.
Certainly, I was just thinking that, there's lots of image recognition apps now available that help identify
Yeah.
species too. And that could be a really interesting use of AI. Like everybody nowadays carries a smartphone on them. Often we don't know what the insects we're looking at are. Apps can help with that. And then that can, I can see how that could be used to inform like data gathering by like the science programs. And
Actually, for in case there's people who don't actually even know what citizen science is, because it's really quite a new concept. Can you just explain in your beautiful poetic version what,
You're very
what
sweet.
citizen science is?
Yeah, I think citizen science is sort of a movement to engage people who are interested and inspired by science, but are not necessarily trained. They're not academic scientists themselves, and they participate in research projects by helping collect some of the necessary core data that can inform analyses and studies and so on. So surveys is a really straightforward example of that. So obviously scientists can't be everywhere at the same time, collecting information about characteristics or ecosystems even. So the one program that is close to my own research on algae is there are now citizen scientists who, as part of their tourism to Antarctica, for example, will help collect samples
Oh, wow.
of plankton because so few people get to go to Antarctica,
Yeah.
but because that business is growing, like the tourism industry is
Yeah.
growing, they can help
Mhm.
collect some of that information, send samples. They help collect and send samples back to labs that analyze that data. In
How great is it to be part of that, right? And you don't have to, I've just put out, you don't have to actually go to, that's really cool if you do. Make sure you bring some specimen bottles. But if you don't have to go there to be part of the future of living in a world that is healthier and back to where, much of it was before we started destroying it. That, just go for a hike. You can use Seek or Merlin or whatever, and like just record. It's so easy. Just go out, look out your window, and there's probably a bug or a piece of a plant or an animal or an insect or a bird, or there's something. And every one of those pieces of data matters. And gets
absolutely. Absolutely. And the nice thing is that with these initiatives, like they're already usually formatted in a certain way that is kind of allows like the recordings to be in a format that then scientists can directly analyze. So like that's great because sporadic observations are cool, but if you could have like a system in place that's a bit more rigorous, that helps, downstream for when the statistics and the models come into play. So, but also it can be just other types of engagement. One of the other stories that I've covered is the use of citizen scientists in helping combat plastic pollution. Also, in polar regions. So that was a story about Arctic plastic. And again, the thing that I love about this is often that happens very organically. Like people care, it's not just scientists who get to do this work, but people, as soon as we see plastic pollution, on the beach, most of us want to just reach down and do something about this. And so the citizen science programs, what they do is not only they kind of combine trash collection and beach cleanups with then trying to identify like the sources of the plastic, what we're looking at, where did it come from? Because often they shouldn't be there, right? Like they shouldn't be there. So somebody's responsible, so somebody can be held accountable. Yeah. And it just helps inform, helps provide a little bit of like the data and the argument behind, things that scientists are trying to do. And citizen scientists are really, really helpful for that.
Yeah. And to add to that, if you're paying attention and you're experiencing this interaction with nature and you're, for example, noticing garbage on the beach or in the ocean or wherever you, or in the river or wherever you are. And then you are part of the solution and then you talk about it, right? Like you tell your friends, you talk about it with the people that you're with, like the story spreads and then everyone more people start being part of the story and part of the solution. I interviewed Val Tovar, who was a director of ocean conservation at Loggerhead, the Marine Life Center near me. And she was telling us, the process of realizing that there were staggering number of cigarette butts on the beach. And, and from what I understand, that's a problem everywhere, right? Like people think it'll just dissolve, it'll just disintegrate. It's not littering, and it turns out that there's literally a zillion microplastic beads inside a cigarette filter. And, by putting, it can lead to solutions. So the result of them learning by examining what was in the garbage that they were collecting off the beach, they put, ashtrays, garbage receptacles for cigarette butts. And the number of cigarette butts went staggeringly down. Like it's all part of the solution, to get the data, to recognize that it's not as simple as you think it is. And that nature isn't just going to take care of it all, like whatever we do to it. So.
And so many people care, I think that's the other misconception. We often feel like, oh, well, the majority are just out there and they don't, they're just part of the problem. But actually, if you give people a solution or you help them become a part of the solution, they're very, they do care, they want to.
Especially kids, like do this with your family, like kids will inspire you and then make you like, what do you mean you're not picking that up? Or what do you, so, and they're pick up technology so much faster than adults anyway. So fantastic. So, right. So tell us where you're going, like what some of the fun things are that you're working on now and where you're going and how we can find you. And then I'm going to keep in touch because I just adore chatting with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jessica. Yeah. One of the things that this has been a big leap for me, actually, focusing more on the writing professionally. So I'm really excited about where it's taking me. The stories are becoming stories that I personally care more and more about. I mean, it's not that I didn't care about it. My previous reporting, I do, but I'm focusing now on sort of longer, deeper dives into certain issues. And I'm hoping to write a book next.
Well, I gather you've started. It's about I'm getting this wrong. It's not protozoa. It's something a lot more complicated than that. Bioluminescent something. I don't know. Go for it. Tell me. Tell us what it is.
Well, I actually already wrote one book. I've written half of another, and I'm trying to start a third. So there's a lot of ideas.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
The first one I wrote, it's not published yet, and I'm going to save it for a little bit later. But it's a part biography, and it's about sort of some time I spent in the ocean doing science, and sort of it's an expedition memoir, and sort of gives a lot of background for the algal science. But it's on the back burner. I wrote it during the pandemic. That was really great. And now I'm planning to write a book much more, less biographical, but much more about just the algal world and all the various things that we can learn from algae, but hopefully do it, with the skills that I've learned by writing for Nautilus, connecting it to like culture and art and bigger ideas.
Beautiful.
But yes,
It's
I'm hoping
so cool
do
to
that.
see some of the photography, the micro photography
Oh,
that
yes.
gets down, like, because algae is not a simple single cell. Like there's nothing simplistic or boring when you
No.
get down to that level, like at all. So
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, they're jewels, like they're so beautiful. And some of them have membranes that are made of silica that is kind of like glass. So like they look like they live inside beautiful glass houses.
can't
Yeah,
wait.
no, they're very visually very pretty, important again on the same way that insects are important. They're small, but meaningful on a sort of ecosystem level because they connect nutrients.
Everything.
Yeah, everything, really, literally everything. Like every second breath we take, right, is algal produced.
Okay, just from like that line. Okay, every second, but we need to follow this up with another conversation about that because that statement in itself is pretty crazy. Like
for sure,
every bit of that there's like 10 words. So we'll go there next. I'll write I have to bring you on, put an article in one of my newsletters about that too. Fantastic. So are you, you've taken this, you've transitioned, you were started in Greece and then you were in England and now you're in California, and you okay? The fires impact you? And
oh, thank you for asking. Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to live in this brave new world, right? I mean, in Greece, where I'm from, we used to have like horrible heat waves. I'd say once every 5 years when I was a kid, and now it's definitely every year. And there are catastrophic wildfires that affect communities. So, and now, of course, in the winter in California, the fires in LA have been so devastating to watch. We're thankfully unaffected here, other than, our air quality is pretty poor, but it's just, I think what's terrifying is to think that this is sort of the new normal, right?
Yeah.
That is going to keep happening, and that this is probably every year from now is likely to have more and more of these disasters and extreme climate events. But in all of this, I have a little girl. she's 2 years old. Like I look at her and I'm just, it just makes you want to do even more, because I want her to want all of us and the future generations, of course, to come to have what we got, like it's not even that we already had a pretty, a better planet than we have today. I think that's kind of the sad part, right?
Important to like recognize.
Fight for it. I want to fight for it. I want us all to fight for it. And I think we can. I'm largely optimistic. I think it does require will and action. And resilience, but I think, we could do it.
I love that. What a beautiful way to end. We can do this. Like we do, but we need to do the work, right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
Talking, and we need to keep reading the beautiful stories so that the stories come to life about what's out there that you offer. Read Elena's work, read Nautilus, become a citizen scientist or do more of it, like be part of the solution and bring the joy of learning about how nature and art and society and culture and everything connect, because we are not living in a vacuum. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Thanks, Jessica. It was really great to connect.
Awesome.
This has been a production of BLI Studios, produced by me, Kai. Follow along with our other BLI produced shows at balancinglifesissues.com/podcast-BLI. Got an idea for the show? Email me, Kai, at balancinglifesissues.com. And don't forget to stay in touch with your host, Jessica, at jessica@winwinwinmindset.com. Anything else to add, Miles?
Yeah.